Margaret sat in the blue armchair where she used to knit, her hands trembling empty in her lap, when Robert approached with her afternoon tea, Earl Grey with 2 sugars, just the way she always liked it. She looked at him with wide eyes filled with pure terror. "Who are you?" she whispered, pressing her back against the armchair as if trying to disappear into it. "What do you want from me? Where's my husband?" Her words cut through the room's silence like broken glass. Robert stood frozen, the cup trembling in his hands, watching the woman he had shared a bed with for 43 years look at him as if he were a dangerous intruder. The wall clock continued to tick, tick, tick as Margaret softly cried, begging this stranger to leave her alone. Robert carefully placed the cup on the table because his hands couldn't stop shaking. 43 years of good mornings, 43 years of I love yous, 43 years of 2 intertwined lives, and now she saw him as a threat. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to the beginning. If you've ever cared for someone who forgot your name, leave a candle emoji in the comments. Your story matters too. Robert could still smell the coffee Margaret made on Sunday mornings when she softly hummed a tune whose name she could never remember. She had a gift for turning a house into a home. Fresh flower arrangements on the kitchen table, the sound of her sewing machine in the back room, the familiar shuffle of her slippers down the wooden hallway. It was Margaret who remembered birthdays, medications, and appointments. It was she who knew where every document, every photo, every memory of a life built brick by brick was kept. Robert always joked that she had an elephant's memory, able to recall what he'd said 3 weeks ago, his mother's recipe from 1987, or the name of the neighbor who moved away 15 years prior. The first signs came disguised as absent-mindedness. Margaret would burn dinner, forget where she put her keys, or repeat the same question 3 times in the same conversation. "It's just age," she'd laugh, shaking her head. "I'm getting senile." But at the doctor's appointment, when the neurologist said the word Alzheimer's, Robert's world silently collapsed. It wasn't just age. It was the end of everything they knew. If you also miss a voice that no longer remembers yours, comment, "I hear you," and tell us what city and country you're watching this story from. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support more stories like this. In the beginning, it was just names that got lost on the way from her mouth to her tongue. Margaret would pause mid-sentence, her eyes searching for a word she was sure she knew seconds before. "You know, that thing for cooking rice," she'd say, gesturing with her hands as if she could pull the word pot from the air. Robert learned to become his own wife's translator. "Pot," he'd gently complete, and she would smile with relief. "Yes, pot. How could I forget?" They still laughed together at these small confusions, as if they were inside jokes from a long marriage. But the memory lapses began to grow like weeds. Margaret would get lost on the way, from the bedroom to the kitchen. She'd call her sister, asking if she had cancelled Sunday lunch, a lunch that happened every week for 20 years. She'd open the refrigerator and stand there, not knowing what she was looking for. One Thursday afternoon, she was looking at photos on the living room wall when Robert came home from work. "Who is this man in the pictures with you?" she asked, pointing to a wedding photo. Robert's heart stopped for a second. "It's me, Margaret. I'm your husband." She looked at him with curiosity, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "Oh, of course," she said. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of someone agreeing to avoid embarrassment, not of genuine recognition. Robert realized she was pretending to remember, and that hurt more than if she had admitted forgetting. That night, Margaret woke up in the middle of the night and asked where she was. Robert explained that they were home, in their bed, as always. "This isn't my house," she said with frightening certainty. "I want to go home." He held her hand in the darkness, feeling that he was losing pieces of her every day. Family still visited, but conversations became awkward. Margaret repeated the same questions, told the same stories, sometimes in the middle of the same sentence. The grandchildren became uncomfortable, not knowing how to react when their grandmother couldn't remember their names. "She's having a difficult day," Robert would explain, but everyone knew that difficult days were becoming every day. It was one Sunday morning that it happened for the last time. Margaret was in the kitchen trying to make coffee when Robert approached from behind and kissed her forehead. "Good morning, my love," he said, as he had for 4 decades. She turned, and for an instant, a single precious instant, her eyes lit up with true recognition. "Robert," she said, and the name came from her lips like a prayer. "My Robert." He hugged her, feeling that she was truly there, present, his Margaret. For 5 minutes, she talked about garden plans, their daughter's birthday, things that made sense. It was as if a curtain had briefly opened, revealing the woman who still lived inside. But when he returned from the bakery an hour later, Margaret was crying in the living room. "There's a strange man in my house," she told the neighbor on the phone. "He says he knows me, but I've never seen him in my life." Robert stood at the door, holding the bread she had asked for, understanding that those 5 minutes that morning had been a parting gift. She never said his name with recognition again. "Do you remember the last time someone special said your name? Write it here, before that memory also fades away." The alarm clock rang at 5:30 in the morning, but Robert had already been awake for hours. Margaret had fragmented sleep, waking 3-4 times a night, confused about where she was or why it was dark. He learned to sleep with one ear always alert, like parents of newborns. The routine became a careful dance of medications, meals, and gentle redirection. Blue pills in the morning, white in the afternoon, yellow at night. Margaret resisted, spitting out the tablets or hiding them under her tongue. "I don't need medicine," she'd say. "I'm not sick." How do you explain to someone who has forgotten they're sick that they need help? Friends stopped visiting. At first, they'd call asking how she was, offering help. But conversations became uncomfortable when Margaret didn't recognize them, or when she repeated the same question dozens of times. "She's not the same anymore," Robert heard whispers. Slowly, the phone stopped ringing, and invitations stopped arriving. During the day, Margaret followed Robert around the house like a shadow. If he went to the bathroom, she would stand outside the door, screaming his name. If he went out to get the mail, she would panic, searching for him in every room. The independence she once had transformed into a constant fear of abandonment. Robert cancelled poker nights with friends. He stopped going to the club on Sundays. He stopped attending church because Margaret became agitated in crowded places. His life shrank to the confines of the house, to medication schedules, to moments when she was calm enough for him to breathe. One night, he woke up and the bed was empty. Margaret wasn't in the bathroom or the kitchen. He found her in the living room, sitting on the floor, trying to organize old newspaper clippings as if they were important documents. "I need to get everything in order before he comes back," she mumbled. "I can't leave a mess." Robert sat on the floor beside her, watching her trembling hands arrange newspaper sheets into meaningless piles. "Who's coming back, Margaret?" he asked softly. "My husband," she replied without looking up. "He doesn't like a mess." His heart broke a little more, realizing she was waiting for him to come home, even though he was right there beside her. Mood swings were unpredictable. Margaret could be calm in the morning and then suddenly erupt in tears or anger over something insignificant. Once, she had a meltdown because the television was too loud. It was turned off. Another time, she refused to eat because someone poisoned the food. It was the same dinner she had eaten for years. Robert started seeing a stranger in the mirror. Unshaven, red eyes, wrinkled clothes. He was disappearing along with her, getting lost in the labyrinth of the disease that had captured them both. Sometimes he would stand in the kitchen, forgetting why he had gone there, and feel a terrible panic. What if I'm getting sick too? The first time he thought of giving up was in the early hours of the morning when she woke him up crying because there was a strange man in the bed. He tried to calm her down, explain that it was him, her husband, but she screamed for help. The neighbors knocked on the door, worried. Margaret told them Robert was trying to sleep in her bed without permission. He had to show their marriage certificate to convince the police he wasn't an intruder. That night, sitting alone in the kitchen at 3 a.m., Robert looked at the nursing home brochures his daughter had discreetly left on the table. For a moment, just a moment, he imagined what it would be like to hand Margaret over to someone else's care, to sleep a full night, take a leisurely shower, eat a hot meal. But when she appeared in the kitchen, disoriented and scared, looking for him, Robert put the brochures in the drawer. No matter how tired he was, she was his responsibility, his promise, his life. If you've spent entire nights awake for someone who didn't even know you were there, this part is for you. The first accusation came on a Tuesday morning. Margaret was looking for her wedding ring, the one she had taken off herself the night before due to swollen fingers. Robert tried to explain where it was, but she didn't believe him. "You stole my ring," she said with a certainty that cut like a blade. "Thief, you stole my ring." No matter how much Robert showed her the ring, explained that he had put it in her jewelry box so she wouldn't lose it, Margaret wouldn't believe him. In her mind, he was a stranger who had invaded her home and stolen her belongings. She called her daughter, crying, telling her that that man was stealing her jewelry. Karen arrived home to find her father exhausted and her mother hidden in the bedroom, scared. "He won't let me leave the house," Margaret told her daughter. "He locks the doors, hides my keys, won't let me talk to anyone." These were safety measures. Margaret had gotten lost 3 times trying to go home, and the keys were hidden because she tried to drive without remembering how. But in her altered perception, Robert was a jailer. The family began to divide. Karen understood the situation, but the youngest son, Michael, who lived in another state, only heard his mother's reports over the phone. "Maybe it's better for her to be in a specialized facility," he suggested during a tense call. "Dad isn't able to take care of her properly." The words were like punches to Robert's gut. Margaret fabricated elaborate stories. She claimed Robert didn't feed her, that he locked her in her room, that he hit her. None of it was true, but she believed every word. When the social worker showed up at the door, Robert felt his world collapse. Someone had called reporting elder abuse. "Mr. Roberts, I need to ask you some questions," the social worker said, observing Margaret hidden behind the curtain. "Is your wife being well cared for?" Robert showed her the organized medications, the food in the refrigerator, the clean clothes. But Margaret told the social worker she was being held prisoner by a stranger. The investigation lasted 2 weeks. Robert had to prove he wasn't an abuser, that he was indeed married to Margaret, that he was doing his best. Doctors were consulted, neighbors were questioned. The humiliation of having to prove he loved his own wife was devastating. During this period, Margaret's condition worsened. The presence of strangers in the house made her more agitated, more paranoid. She began to refuse to eat, convinced that Robert was poisoning her food. She lost weight rapidly, and this fueled more suspicions about the care she was receiving. One afternoon, Robert found Margaret hiding under the kitchen table, crying. "He's going to hurt me," she whispered. "That man is going to hurt me." Robert knelt down, trying to calm her, but she screamed for help. The neighbors heard, and once again, the police were called. Robert had to leave the house for a few hours while the situation was resolved. It was Michael who suggested institutionalization. "Dad, you can't take it anymore," he said during a family video call. "She needs professional care." But when they arrived with the papers, Margaret had a moment of lucidity. "Don't take me from here," she pleaded. "This is my home. I want to stay in my home." Robert looked at his wife, saw the genuine fear in her eyes, and tore up the papers. The social worker made reports. The family took sides. Robert was left alone defending a woman who didn't remember him, who accused him of crimes he never committed, who saw him as a threat instead of a savior. Some nights, he would lock himself in the bathroom and cry silently, wondering if it wouldn't be better for everyone if he simply disappeared. The worst moment came when Margaret called the police in the middle of the night, reporting an intruder in the house. When the officers arrived, they found Robert sleeping on the sofa. He had started sleeping separately so as not to frighten her. "This man broke into my house," she said, pointing to her husband of 43 years. Robert had to show documents, photos, prove his identity and his right to be in his own home. That night, sitting at the police station waiting for the situation to resolve, Robert looked at his trembling hands and realized he had reached his limit. As much as he loved Margaret, as much as he wanted to take care of her, perhaps it was time to admit that he couldn't anymore. Love sometimes meant knowing when to let go. If you've ever been blamed just for loving too much, share it here in the comments. This is a safe space for you. Robert packed his bags on a Thursday morning while Margaret slept under the effects of a sedative. It wasn't abandonment, it was self-preservation. He moved to his daughter's apartment, leaving a specialized nurse to care for Margaret. "It's temporary," he told himself, "just until I can regain my strength to return." The house became quieter without him. Margaret asked the nurse where that man who used to be here was, but without being able to explain who he was. It was as if Robert had been erased from her memory, leaving only a vague sense that someone important was missing. In the first few days, Robert felt relieved. He slept 12 hours straight for the first time in months. He took a long shower, ate a hot meal, and watched television without interruptions. But guilt gnawed at him. Every time the phone rang, he expected bad news about Margaret. Every night he dreamed of her calling his name, looking for him through the house. The nurse called with daily reports. Margaret was losing weight, sleeping poorly, and becoming agitated in the late afternoons. "She asks for someone," the nurse said. "She doesn't know the name, but she asks if he will come back." Robert felt his heart break with each call, but he couldn't go back. Not yet. It was Karen who called one Sunday morning. "Dad, you need to come. Mum is very ill." Robert found Margaret in bed, thinner, her eyes glazed, staring at the ceiling. She didn't react when he entered the room, but the nurse whispered, "She's been like this since you left, as if she's waiting for someone." Robert sat beside the bed, observing Margaret's irregular breathing. She seemed smaller, more fragile, as if slowly fading away. "Margaret," he softly called, "I'm back." She didn't respond, but her hands stopped trembling for a moment. That's when an old song they used to dance to in their youth started playing on the radio. "Dream a Little Dream of Me," sung by Ella Fitzgerald. Robert saw a tear stream down Margaret's face. She didn't know why she was crying, but the music awakened something deep in her emotional memory. "We used to dance to this song," Robert whispered, more to himself than to her. "At our wedding, remember? You wore your mother's white dress, and I was so nervous I stepped on your foot." Margaret didn't respond with words, but her eyes moved toward the sound of his voice. Robert took her hand, that hand that knew every line, every calloused spot, every ring she used to wear. She didn't pull her hand away, though she showed no recognition. But there was something there. A connection that transcended memory, that existed in a place deeper than names and faces. "I don't know if you recognize me," Robert continued, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know if you remember my name or our life together, but I want you to know that I will never stop loving you, even if you don't know who I am." Margaret didn't respond, but she lightly squeezed his hand. The music continued to play, and Robert began to softly murmur the lyrics. Margaret didn't sing along, but her lips moved silently, as if her body remembered what her mind had forgotten. They stayed like that for an hour, connected by a song that survived Alzheimer's. When the music ended, Margaret turned her head and looked directly into Robert's eyes. There was no recognition there, but there was something more. a familiarity, a comfort, a love that existed beyond names. You are important, she whispered. I don't know why, but you are important. Robert cried silently, understanding that this was the most she could offer. It wasn't Robert, it wasn't my husband, it wasn't my love, but it was enough. It was her saying, with the words she could still find, that even without remembering who he was, she still felt that he mattered. That night, Robert went home. Not because Margaret remembered him, but because he remembered what it truly meant to love someone. It wasn't about being recognized or appreciated. It was about being present, about caring, about honoring a promise that went beyond memory. Do you believe love can endure even when memory fades? Share this story with someone who still believes. Robert began writing on a Monday morning, sitting at the kitchen table while Margaret still slept. It wasn't a letter to her. She wouldn't be able to read it. It was a letter to himself, to his children, to anyone who might one day need to understand what it meant to love someone who is slowly disappearing. My name is Robert James Miller, he wrote. I have been married to Margaret Rose Miller for 43 years. She has Alzheimer's and doesn't remember me, but I want someone to know that she existed, that we existed together, that there was love here. He wrote about the Sunday mornings when Margaret hummed while making coffee, about the way she would wrinkle her nose when she laughed, about the silly arguments that seemed like the end of the world at the time, and now he would give anything to have back. About the projects they did together, the dreams they shared, the fears they faced hand in hand. Page after page, Robert rebuilt Margaret's life with words. Not the Margaret who forgot where she was, but the Margaret who had been for 7 decades, the teacher who inspired hundreds of children, the mother who made unique Halloween costumes for each child, the wife who held his hand when his father died, the woman who planted flowers that only bloomed in spring because she believed in the future. Margaret woke up and found Robert writing. She didn't ask what he was doing. Lately, she asked few questions. But she sat beside him, watching the pen move across the paper. Pretty handwriting, she commented. Thank you, Robert replied, and continued writing. He wrote about the last 3 years, about the day of the diagnosis, when she asked if she was going to die, and he didn't know what to answer. About the small daily losses, a forgotten word, an unrecognized face, a skill that disappeared. About the nights when she cried without knowing why, and he held her hands trying to convey love through touch. She accused me of being a stranger, Robert wrote. And perhaps in a way I am. I'm no longer the 25-year-old she knew. I'm no longer the middle-aged man who built this house with her. I'm a 68-year-old man, tired, haunted, trying to care for a woman who doesn't know who I am. But I am still the man who promised to love her in sickness and in health. Karen found her father writing one afternoon when she came to visit. What is that, Dad? She asked. These are the memories she can no longer keep, he replied. Someone needs to remember. Karen sat beside him and began to add her own memories. The elaborate birthday cakes her mother made, the bedtime stories, the way she would say, I love you, when she thought no one was listening. Michael came from another state for the weekend and joined the project. 3 generations sat around the table, reconstructing Margaret's life with words. The grandchildren contributed drawings. The daughters-in-law brought photos. Little by little, the kitchen filled with papers, memories, evidence of a life well lived. Margaret observed everything with growing curiosity. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she felt it was important. Sometimes she would pick up a photo and smile, though she could no longer identify who the people were. They look happy, she would say. Yes, Robert replied. They were very happy. At the end of the 3rd week, Robert had written 127 pages. It wasn't just about Margaret. It was about them. About what it meant to build a life together. About how love transforms but never disappears. About how some promises are stronger than memory. The last page was the most difficult. Robert wrote about the present, about what it was like to care for someone who didn't remember him. Some days are harder than others, he wrote. Some days I feel like I'm losing my sanity along with her. But other days, when she holds my hand or smiles for no reason, I remember that love doesn't need memory to exist. Margaret was sleeping when Robert finished writing. He put the pages in a blue folder, her favorite color, and placed it on the shelf next to their wedding photos. He didn't know if anyone would ever read it, but it didn't matter. He had done what he needed to do, ensure that Margaret Rose Miller was remembered as she truly was. The next morning, Margaret woke up and found Robert making coffee. "You make good coffee," she said. "Thank you," he replied, pouring 2 cups. She didn't know his name, didn't remember their life together, but she smiled when he sat beside her. And in that moment, Robert understood that this was enough. She had forgotten who he was, but he would remember for both of them. If you care for someone who no longer knows you exist, share this story. In every city, there's an invisible caregiver, and their love deserves to be remembered. The blue folder is still on the shelf, next to the photos Margaret no longer recognizes. Robert opens it sometimes, rereading the pages he wrote about a woman who existed, who loved, who was loved. The words won't bring back her memory, but they ensure that her memory is not completely lost. Margaret is in the blue armchair, watching the trees outside the window. She no longer knows their names, but she still likes how the leaves dance in the wind. Robert sits beside her, taking her hand. She doesn't pull her hand away, though she doesn't know why that touch feels familiar. Sometimes love exists beyond what we can remember. On the kitchen table, there's a sheet of paper with only one line written in shaky handwriting. "My name is Margaret, and someone loves me." She wrote this on a morning of lucidity, before forgetting again. But the words remained there, a small anchor in an ocean of oblivion. Memory can disappear, but sometimes love stays to remember who we are.